The day is June 14th, 2013. Games have been stale as you're waiting for the release of GTA 5 in September. A new game comes out titled The Last of Us, published by Naughty Dog. You most likely have played the Uncharted series, so you're very intrigued on what their take would be on a zombie apocalypse. You buy the game and you get your heart broken just within the first 30 minutes of the game. You didn't see it at that moment, but right then and there, you were starting to play one of the greatest games of our generation. Hey guys, pretty good hook, right? No, I didn't think so, at all. No, it was actually pretty bad. I don't like it. Today is the 10-year anniversary of The Last of Us, and honestly, that just blows my mind. Since then, the franchise has been on the top of the gaming world with a remaster the year after, a sequel, a multiplayer game we probably will never see, an HBO series, and a remake. Why did they do this? We'll never know. It's safe to say that The Last of Us made an impact on gaming as a whole, and it continues to show 10 years later. 10 years later is a lot of years, but does the game hold up well today? Well, that's what we're here for. If you're not familiar with the games, The Last of Us is set in an apocalyptic world which fell due to the evolution of fungal infections, causing it to spread to humans throughout the country. We follow a smuggler named Joel that is tasked with smuggling a girl named Ellie across the country to a group named the Fireflies because she happens to be immune to this said virus. The game tackles simple but emotional themes and has a story that captures you in so many unique ways. That synopsis should, at least interest you in a little bit, and you'll probably become more interested as we break down the plot, but first we should probably start with how this game came to be. The development for The Last of Us started in 2009 after the release of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. Development for this game was completely different from their previous projects because half the studio went to work on Uncharted 3 and the other half worked on The Last of Us. The relationship that director Neil Druckmann wanted to build between Ellie and Joel became the main focus throughout development and ended up being probably the best part of the game come launch. The Last of Us was announced in December of 2011 and ended up being one of the most anticipated games for the time. All of that anticipation stuck around until the game's eventual release on June 14th, 2013 for the PS3 exclusively. And the game was a huge hit. And not only was the game praised for its story, it was praised for its in-depth gameplay that pretty much put it in a league of its own for an action-adventure game. As much as I would love to dive into the story of this game, we should probably start to talk about the gameplay and how it changed gaming at the time. See, The Last of Us's gameplay consists of a third-person over-the-shoulder with guns and weapons involved to kill enemies throughout the story, otherwise known as a walking simulator by people that just don't like these games at all. And in my opinion, the gameplay for this game was just so good for its time, and it got even better in the sequel, which has some of the best gameplay I've ever seen in a game. The stealth in these games have so many layers of how to approach a situation. The series is pretty much if Metal Gear Solid had zombies. Yeah, MGS probably has better stealth, but I'd say The Last of Us is right below them. The game gives you weapons to use and lots of environment to maneuver around to take each enemy out one by one. It's very fluent and just fun to play if you decide to stealth an entire area. There were a lot of times throughout playthroughs that I just wanted to restart each section if I messed up just to see if I could get through an entire section with fully stealth. Combat was for the first game. It really just consisted of you just pressing square, and it really just stays the same throughout the series. Even in the sequel, they really just add a dodge button, which that makes everything better, but it's still really the exact same concept with both games. There's not much more you can really critique about this gameplay because technically for its time, it's solid gameplay. 10 years later, it's a little outdated, but it doesn't take away from that overall experience. With the gameplay out of the way, we could probably get into the real shit of this game, and that's the amazing story. The game opens up with a man getting home from work and sitting on the couch with his daughter. It is shown that the man's name is Joel and his daughter's name is Sarah, and using context clues, we can probably already assume that the outbreak hasn't started yet, which I believe to be a good start because now we get to see how that outbreak unfolds in real time. The scene plays out as we find out that today is Joel's birthday. As a gift for her father, Sarah gives Joel a new watch where we see a glimpse of their bond together, and it's really heartwarming. Sarah falls asleep and we're awoken by a phone on the dresser where we answer and hear Joel's brother Tommy in an intense panic as he requests that Sarah gets the phone to Joel. Sarah searches the house for Joel, but as we see on the news, something is not right in Texas. So much is going on the news that an explosion from the news is visible a couple miles out from the house. Sarah, being a frightened little girl, continues her search for Joel, where we find him in a panic and we're introduced to our first zombie. And it really jump scares you as he jumps at the slider. Like, you can't do this in the first 10 minutes. It's really just alarming. Joel takes care of the zombie as we rush outside to find Tommy waiting in his truck for us so we can leave. Throughout the entirety of the driving sequence, there's so much panic displayed in such a short time, and it really immerses you immediately. Like, it seriously feels like you are right here watching all of this unfold with your own eyes. Which, I mean, you kind of are because you're playing the game, but you know what I mean. The three of them make their way into the city where panic is just even worse, and it ultimately ends in them getting into a car crash. In this moment, we take control of Joel for the first time because Sarah ends up breaking her leg in the crash. Joel decides to carry her as we follow Tommy throughout the newly infected city. As we reach the bridge to exit the city, the military stops Joel and makes the decision that he and Sarah should be killed. The soldier decides to open fire, but in that last second before Joel's killed, he's saved by Tommy. Joel wasn't hit by the gunfire, but we unfortunately end up seeing that Sarah was. We rush over to her and we watch an extremely emotional scene where we watch Sarah die in Joel's arms. The screen cuts to black and a cutscene overviewing the outbreak plays. Now, you're probably asking why I decided to take a decent chunk of time to explain the intro to this game, and all I can say is that I truly believe this to be the ideal way to start a game like this. So many emotions are displayed in the introduction to this game, and it's executed perfectly. It wraps you in, and it already gives you a character to care about and have sympathy for, Joel. Throughout the cutscene overviewing the outbreak, we learn that the government lost control of the country, and in turn it allowed the creation of different groups throughout the country. The most notable group that's mentioned is the Fireflies, which are considered freedom fighters on one side and terrorists on the other. The group is dedicated to restoring society by using any means necessary. We end up seeing Joel again after this overview, but this time we are 25 years into the future. We see that the world has just gone to complete shit, and Joel has resorted to becoming a smuggler with a new character we meet named Tess. After a deal goes south, the duo kill a man who sold weapons that were owed to them. It's right here where we meet Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies in this district. She explains how she ended up getting the guns, and that if Joel and Tess want them back, they'll have to come with her and complete a smuggle job. Once they reach safety, Marlene explains that the job that they are doing is smuggling a 14-year-old girl named Ellie to the Fireflies hiding out in the Massachusetts State House outside of the quarantine zone. We see in the time we have before they sneak out at night that Joel is not interested in making friends with Ellie. We can easily tell that this is a defense mechanism for Joel, as he does not want to get close to any other little girl just because of what happened to Sarah that night. Joel, Tess, and Ellie sneak out at night, but after an encounter with a government patrol, they discover that Ellie is infected. Symptoms normally occur within 2 days, but Ellie claims that she was infected 3 weeks earlier and that her immunity may be the key to saving humanity. The trio makes their way to the destination through hordes of the infected, but finds that the Fireflies have been killed. Tess later reveals that she had been bitten by an infected, and believing in Ellie's importance, sacrifices herself against pursuing soldiers so that Joel and Ellie can escape. Once they reach safety, Joel makes the decision to find Tommy, who was a former Firefly, in the hope that he can help them locate the remaining Fireflies. With the help of Bill, a smuggler and survivalist who owes Joel a favor, Joel and Ellie acquire a working vehicle from his neighborhood in Lincoln. Driving into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Joel and Ellie are ambushed by bandits and their car is wrecked. They ally with two brothers, Henry and Sam, and with their help, they are able to escape the city. But unfortunately, Sam is bitten in that time but tries to hide it from the group. As his infection takes hold, Sam tries to attack Ellie, but Henry shoots him dead before taking his own life. The screen cuts to black. We jump to fall, where Joel and Ellie find Tommy in Jackson, Wyoming, where he's assembled a fortified settlement near a hydroelectric dam with his wife Maria. Joel tries to leave Ellie with Tommy, but after she confronts him about Sarah, he lets her stay with him. Tommy directs them to a Firefly facility at the University of Eastern Colorado. They find the university abandoned, but learn that the Fireflies have moved to a hospital in Salt Lake City, Utah. The two are attacked by bandits, and Joel is severely wounded while escaping. We now jump to winter, where Ellie and Joel shelter in the mountains. Joel is on the brink of death and relies on Ellie to care for him. Hunting for food, Ellie encounters David and James, scavengers willing to trade medicine for food. After David reveals that the university bandits were part of his group, Ellie becomes hostile. Ellie comes back and tries to lead David's group away from Joel, but eventually is captured. David intends to recruit her into his cannibal group. Ellie escapes after killing James, but David corners her in a burning restaurant. Meanwhile, Joel recovers from his wounds and sets out to find Ellie. He reaches her just as she kills David with a machete, an act that traumatizes her, and Joel's right there to comfort her before they flee, really confirming Joel's love and care for Ellie, something he probably would never feel before this game started. We then jump to spring, where Joel and Ellie have finally arrived in Salt Lake City. As they make their way through a tunnel, Ellie is rendered unconscious after almost drowning before they're captured by a Firefly patrol. In the hospital, we meet Marlene again as she tells Joel that Ellie is being prepped for surgery. In hopes of producing a vaccine for the infection, the Fireflies must remove the infected portion of Ellie's brain, which would kill her. Unwilling to let Ellie die, Joel battles his way to the operating room, kills the lead surgeon, and carries the unconscious Ellie to the parking garage. Surely this won't come back to bite him in any way, this should be fine. He's then confronted by Marlene, whom he shoots and kills to prevent the Fireflies from pursuing them. On the drive out of the city, Ellie wakes up and Joel lies and tells her that the Fireflies had found many other immune people, but were unable to create a cure and stopped trying. On the outskirts of Tommy's settlement, Ellie expresses her survivor's guilt. At her insistence, Joel swears that his story about the Fireflies is true. Ellie says okay, and the screen cuts to black. The end. Now, in these last 10 years, Joel's decision has become one of the most controversial topics in gaming history. Did he do the right thing? Or did he doom humanity? I mean, they're all valid opinions, but in my opinion, I'd just like to believe that he made the right decision. Whether it's because you resonate with Joel as a father, or you're just going off pure sympathy you've developed for Joel and Ellie to the fact where you can't see them apart, I think the mass majority would agree with me over the fact that Joel did the right thing. Morally, it's technically not good what happened, but when you take into account how unprofessional the Fireflies handled every situation throughout this game, and I mean already having bias towards Joel just leads you to believe that the Fireflies didn't know what they were doing, and in turn didn't deserve to have the cure in their hands. The other point of view is valid as well, but we'll truly never know if they were going to be able to make a cure, and we just have to ride with the idea that they probably weren't going to be able to. It's a very intriguing topic and has sparked conversation in the fan base for the last 10 years, which creates longevity and relevancy. The true question that this decision asks is that if morality really matters in a world where humanity as a whole has lost themselves. Add the great story and the great characters all together, and The Last of Us became a universal acclaim with critics across the world praising its gameplay, storytelling, and even going as far to say one of the greatest games of our generation. Performances from Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson were also praised and still hold up as some of the greatest performances in a video game story. The refreshing take on an apocalyptic world and then adding a complex story about survival and the means to continue in a lost world has undoubtedly put it in a tier in its own for games and continues to shine 10 years later. After all this time, the game has sold over 20 million copies and continues to be a staple in the PlayStation family. Following the immediate success of the game, a few months later, Naughty Dog released a DLC for the main game titled Left Behind on February 14th, 2014. The DLC dives into Ellie's backstory and the time before we meet her as we see how her story came to be. The story is very grounded and showcases how unforgiving the world of The Last of Us is. We follow Ellie and her best friend Riley on a day of adventure where they spend one last day together before Riley goes off to join the Fireflies. The story also alternates with the time in between fall and winter where Ellie has to save Joel from death after his injury at the university. That part's pretty boring though, so we'll stay focused on the Ellie and Riley love story. Ellie and Riley spend their day in the abandoned mall where they get their chance to act like kids before the outbreak. They eventually confess their feelings to each other, and it just seems like a perfect place to end. Nope, they both get ambushed by a horde of zombies, which ends in both of them getting bit. They consider shooting themselves, but end up deciding to spend their last hours together. Using the context clues, Ellie most likely had to kill Riley later on, and then she realized that she was immune, triggering the events of the main story. The inclusion of this DLC gave insight into Ellie's character and where she begins to develop this survivor's guilt that she has by the end of the game. It's beautifully written and showcases the unhappy endings that the apocalypse provides. While not being too much for the player after the main story, I consider this a perfect middle ground for a side story. Not too much or little content and executes the emotions of the story naturally. With the addition of Left Behind also came the Factions multiplayer. Factions was The Last of Us's take on a PvP multiplayer, and it's pretty good. It's not anything crazy like COD, but it held its own and still has a player count to this day. Without getting too much into detail, it's pretty much just a team deathmatch with The Last of Us's gameplay mechanics. It also reuses the guns and areas you see throughout the main story. It's nothing special, but it's still fun to play, and I hope they really expand on the blueprint in the standalone game that they do for it. If it doesn't get canceled, which, it seems more likely that it will nowadays, but we can only hope. With even more time passed since the release of the game on PS3, the PS4 had come out and completely took gaming to a whole new level. With that newfound power in mind, Naughty Dog released The Last of Us Remastered on July 29th, 2014 to the PS4. All of the content from the original game was included, and the resolution and frame rate were also increased to accommodate for the PS4's power. To nobody's surprise, the game sold really well as it became the definitive way to play The Last of Us. Everyone and their mom had this game for their console, it became the most absolute must-play game for the console, and Naughty Dog used that to their advantage to take over as one of PlayStation's most iconic first-party game studios. Now, you would think that this game wouldn't need any more tweaking done and can hold up for many future generations, right? Nope, they decided to remake this shit again for PS5. And not like how they did for PS4. No, this time it was a complete from-the-ground remake of the exact same game, and to this day still makes zero sense. On September 2nd, 2022, The Last of Us Part 1 was released exclusively to the PS5, with a March release date window for PC, with the idea of reimagining the original game for new audiences. Now, with how they describe this game, you'd think the game's been out for 20 plus years, like a Resident Evil or Final Fantasy. No, at the time this game was just over 9 years old and had already been remastered a few years back. Okay, fine. Remaking it to take advantage of the capabilities of the PS5 is fine, but at least they'll add some new things to make it a true definitive version, right? Nope. Everything about this game is the exact same. It is a carbon copy of the original, just with better mechanics and graphics. I still don't see the appeal to this. It doesn't enhance the game in any way or expand on the original game, so what's its purpose? Final Fantasy VII and the Resident Evil remakes have done the most to change their story around to make it a new experience for new audiences and returning audiences. But for The Last of Us remake, you're literally just replaying the game again with better graphics. And I won't lie, I played it, I loved it. It's Last of Us, and I'm sure the people who never played this game really enjoyed this, but I still can't see the vision for why this game had to be made over something else. The only real redeeming factor that makes this remake worth it is that it offers the accessibility from Part 2. This single-handedly saves the game from not having worth outside of a replay. It helps people with disabilities to experience this game the right way, and I give Naughty Dog props to that. It's very important for everyone to experience this game, and they've made it easier for everyone to do so. But it's still not necessary for everyone else. The original game holds up perfectly fine and still has the multiplayer, which is a plus over the remake. Remake culture is starting to get way too saturated, and it seems as though everything is getting a remake with almost no soul to it. There are of course exceptions like Final Fantasy and Resident Evil, but it's just weird how games are becoming like movies with all the remakes. I appreciate them because they're obviously better in technical circumstances, but it can't be the only reason for a remake. And I haven't even gotten into how bad the PC port for this game was. PC players were extremely excited to experience the world of The Last of Us, and what they got was a half-baked product. The game released horribly optimized, and it led to a lot of bad reviews because the game was extremely broken with tons of bugs and performance issues. It's just horrible to see games have this issue nowadays. Like I said in the Final Fantasy video, a finished product that takes more time is infinitely better than a broken game that releases earlier. The clear only reason this remake came out was to be an entry point for people before the HBO series released, but it's clear there was a deadline, and the game was not ready for that deadline and only dropped to increase viewership for the show, which in turn created a bad product to start. Speaking of the show, we can finally get back on track to something good to happen in the Last of Us franchise. The Last of Us Season 1 on HBO first aired on January 15th, 2023 and ended on March 12th, 2023, and boy was it great. People love to say that it broke the curse of video game adaptations just being bad no matter what, and while I agree that it was great, there have been previous adaptations that have done good as well, like Sonic and Arcane. Considering the fact that this is live action, this is probably the best live action video game adaptation. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey as Joel and Ellie give amazing performances and almost enhance what can't be in video games through having real people act out the same scenes from the game. And what I love about this series is that it's not just scene for scene. Most of the side characters from the original game get immense amounts of character development, and even main characters get developed in ways that would have killed the pacing in the game and gives new insight on these beloved characters. Like seriously, the entire third episode is dedicated to Bill's love story, which is a completely original episode, and Joel and Ellie only pop up at the end for a few minutes. Even so, it's still one of the best episodes in the series and a beautiful love story. It also took Bill from being a character you barely see to a character you seriously end up caring about all the way until the end of his story. They do this with Henry, Sam, and Riley, and at times make the show better than the game. And better yet, it allows people to not have to play the game because there isn't necessarily an inferior way to experience the story because they're both solid and high quality for the style of entertainment they're presented in. The show was critically acclaimed just like the game and has already been renewed for Season 2, which will follow The Last of Us Part 2, one of the most controversial games of all time. But we'll save that for another video. This is the original's big day. In my opinion, The Last of Us changed gaming. Without The Last of Us, storytelling in video games doesn't get better and expand to the new horizons, and let me tell you, it would probably suck if storytelling wasn't at the high it is now. And while The Last of Us is a somewhat simple story, it's also extremely complex in its characters and how it displays its themes. It's one of those games that you could talk about for hours and develop newfound love through multiple playthroughs. It's important because of how much impact it has on PlayStation and how they decided to move forward with their games. PlayStation's staple is easily their single-player adventures, and it continues to impress the gaming community with how good storytelling can be in games, and it wasn't possible without The Last of Us. Now, 10 years is a lot of time for games. Lots of games with this much time under its belt end up becoming outdated and hard to play with today's software. But not The Last of Us. In this case, it's a game that has stood the test of time. Although this game has been remastered twice, the game still remains a staple for gaming in general. It's kind of crazy that in this generation of gaming, Naughty Dog has two amazing franchises in Uncharted and The Last of Us. And surprisingly, both game franchises hold up really well with today's hardware. Of course with the help of remasters, but not a lot of studios can say this about their games, and it's good to see more future-proof games. In the 10 years since The Last of Us released, the franchise has achieved 2 remasters, a sequel, an HBO series, with still more to come. It's safe to say that the longevity of this series as a whole will continue to stand as the franchise continues to grow to more and more people, and I'll definitely be waiting patiently to see what Naughty Dog does next with the series. Thank God, man. I'm finally done with this. Seriously, I've been working on this for a couple weeks. I just want to go to bed. Thanks everyone for taking this adventure with me on one of my favorite games of all time. If you enjoyed this video, there's other videos, popping up in the corners and stuff like that. Go and watch those, other awesome videos. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.